Driving through the thick forest, I finally got to the cabin I had rented for a week. It was supposed to be a break from the craziness of city life. The cabin stood alone, surrounded by tall trees and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow any noise. The nearest neighbor was miles away, which was exactly what I wanted. Unpacking my bags, I looked around the cabin. It had simple furniture, a stone fireplace, and the dim light of late afternoon coming through small windows. I set up my things, made a quick meal, and settled in for the night. The quiet was unsettling, but I told myself it was just my city nerves. The first night, I slept badly, waking up several times to the sounds of the forest, branches creaking, leaves rustling, and the occasional distant animal call. By morning, I was tired but determined to enjoy my alone time. I spent the day hiking, exploring the woods, and trying to soak in the calm. But there was a nagging feeling that I couldn't shake, a sense of being watched. On the third day, I decided to explore a bit more. I found a path that led deeper into the forest, marked by old, worn-out signs. As I walked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I brushed it off as paranoia, but my steps got quicker. I eventually came upon an old, abandoned cabin, much smaller and more broken down than mine. Its windows were smashed, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. The air around it felt colder. Curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped inside. The cabin was a mess, furniture broken, dust thick on every surface, and a lingering smell of rot. It looked like it had been left for years. I saw old photos scattered on the floor, but they were too faded to make out clearly. A strange sense of fear filled me, and I decided to leave. Back at my cabin, I couldn't shake the creepy feeling from the abandoned cabin. I tried to distract myself with a book, but every creak of the wood and rustle of leaves outside seemed louder. That night, I struggled to sleep again. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the back door. I froze, listening hard. The scratching continued, slow and steady. My heart raced as I crept to the door, peeking through the small window. Nothing. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and flung it open. The cold night air hit me, but there was no one there. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat by the fireplace, gripping a poker for comfort, waiting for the dawn. When daylight finally came, I packed my bags, ready to leave. This break wasn't worth the growing fear eating at me. As I loaded my car, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. In the daylight, it looked harmless, almost inviting. But the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. I quickly got in my car and started the engine. Driving away, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. A few miles down the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the rearview mirror, in the dust of my cabin, a single handprint, smudged and unmistakably human, was slowly fading away. I sped up, my heart pounding. A few days later, back in the city, I started to relax. But one night, I found dirt and pine needles scattered on my apartment floor. My front door was locked, and there were no open windows. That sense of being watched had followed me home. Now, I can't escape it. Every night, I hear faint scratching at my door. The feeling of being watched is stronger than ever. My apartment no longer feels safe. I keep all the lights on, hoping it will keep whatever is out there at bay. But deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before it gets in. I was back on the road, driving a load of steel beams from Chicago to Denver. I knew the route well, but the night was so dark, and the highway seemed more empty than usual. The radio mentioned a storm coming, but I thought I could beat it if I kept going. I drove through the flat lands of Nebraska, my truck's headlights cutting through the blackness. After hours of driving, I started feeling really tired. My eyelids felt heavy, and the lines on the road started to blur. I needed a break. The next rest stop was still far away, but a small, almost hidden sign pointed to a dirt road off the highway. It wasn't on my GPS, but I decided to take it. hoping it would lead to a spot where I could rest. The dirt road was rough and narrow, barely wide enough for my truck. Trees lined both sides, their branches casting creepy shadows that danced in my headlights. After a few miles, I found a clearing with an old, abandoned barn. It wasn't much, but it would do for a short break. I parked my truck and stepped out, stretching my legs and breathing in the cool night air. The barn stood in front of me, its wooden planks old and falling apart. I leaned against my truck, closing my eyes for a moment. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant sound of thunder. A sudden rustling sound made me snap my eyes open. I looked around but saw nothing. Just the wind, I told myself. I climbed back into my truck, locked the doors, and settled into my seat. I set an alarm on my phone for a quick nap, but before I could drift off, I heard the rustling again, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and reluctantly stepped out of the truck. The beam of light cut through the darkness, showing nothing but the tall grass and the rundown barn. I walked towards the barn carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, the rustling turned into a faint, steady tapping. Inside, the barn was empty, except for some old farming tools covered in cobwebs. The tapping sound echoed off the walls. I followed the noise to the back corner, where a big metal door stood slightly open. I hesitated, then pulled the door open. Behind it was a small, makeshift room with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The source of the tapping was a broken clock on the wall, its hands stuck and twitching. But what caught my eye was a map spread out on a table under the clock. It was a detailed map of the area, with various routes and notes scribbled in the margins. As I looked at the map, I realized it showed a different route through the mountains, one that was shorter but more dangerous. Someone had marked it with warnings about landslides and narrow passes. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just any map. It seemed like it belonged to someone who knew these roads well. A sudden gust of wind slammed the barn door shut, making me jump. I decided I'd had enough. I hurried back to my truck and started the engine, eager to get back on the main road. The dirt path seemed even narrower on the way out, but I managed to drive through it without any problems. Back on the highway, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The storm had caught up to me, and rain began to pour down hard. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the darkness felt heavy. Hours later, I finally reached a well-lit rest stop. I pulled in, parked my truck, and let out a long sigh of relief. I was safe, but the encounter left me uneasy. I never found out who made that map or why it was there, but one thing was clear: I wouldn't be taking any more unknown detours anytime soon. The rest of the journey to Denver was uneventful, but the memory of that night stayed with me. Every time I passed a hidden dirt road or an abandoned building, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The open road had its mysteries, and some were better left unexplored. Weeks later, I was back on the same route. As I drove through Nebraska, I couldn't help but glance at every dirt road sign, half expecting to see that same hidden path. One night, as I passed a similar sign, I saw something in my rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. Standing by the side of the road, just barely visible in my taillights, was a figure watching me. I couldn't make out any details, but the figure didn't move, just stood there, staring. I sped up, heart racing, and didn't look back. From that night on, the open road never felt the same. I always had the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, watching. And every now and then, on those long, lonely drives, I'd catch a glimpse of that figure in my rearview mirror, just for a second, before it disappeared into the night. I was driving down Route 66 late at night, and it always creeped me out. The road seemed to go on forever, with just the occasional flicker of my headlights and the soft hum of the engine for company. Approaching an old, rusty sign that said, "Next gas station 50 miles. My heart sank. The fuel gauge was dangerously low. I kept going, hoping to reach the next town before I ran out of gas. Minutes turned into hours in the darkness. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, peering through the mist for any signs of the road ahead. Then I saw it, a figure standing by the roadside. My heart skipped a beat as I drove past, catching a glimpse of a tattered jacket and an old hat. A hitchhiker, maybe, but who would be out here at this hour? A chill ran down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. Had they vanished into the fog or slipped back into the darkness? The engine coughed and died. Panic surged as the car coasted to a stop. Out of gas. In the eerie silence, I cursed and checked my phone. No signal. I was truly alone, stranded on this lonely highway. I decided to walk, hoping to find help. The fog obscured everything, making every step uncertain. Time dragged on as I trudged forward, my senses on edge with every shadow and sound. Suddenly, headlights cut through the mist, a truck slowing down as it approached. Relief flooded over me as I waved desperately, explaining my situation to the driver. He nodded and offered to take me to the next gas station. During the drive, he shared stories of strange happenings along this deserted road. I listened, uneasy but grateful for his company and the warmth of the truck's heater against the cold night. Eventually, the lights of a small town appeared on the horizon. The driver dropped me off at a gas station, where I filled my tank and thanked him profusely. Glancing back at the dark highway, now distant and quiet, I realized how close I had come to a different fate. As I drove away, relieved to leave the eerie highway behind, a chill ran down my spine again. In the rearview mirror, for a split second, I thought I saw a faint figure standing by the road where the truck had picked me up. But as quickly as I noticed, it vanished into the night.